Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining this session. My name's Chris Fox, and I'm president of Novartis Gene Therapies, and I'm joined today by two colleagues in person, as well as two virtually. And just to give a little context for today's session, and I think it was said well, that we're kind of looking at a macro perspective of kind of what are some of the lessons learned, and really underscoring what are the future opportunities. And I'm heartened to hear about the opportunities because in talking and listening in the last couple of days to all of the incredible speakers and guests that we've had, you know, it's definitely a true north for all of us. And in talking to many of you at the breaks and having the chance to meet many of you about the patient being at the center of all that we do. And so when we explore those opportunities, it's really with that in mind. And so we'll just jump right in and get to the panelists. And what I'd say is, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, when I ask you your first question, that would be great. And Nick, we're going to start with you. So clearly you have done a lot of investment in the cell and gene space. And I was wondering if you would give us kind of a macro perspective of kind of the trends that you're seeing, and then what distinguishes companies that you would choose to invest in?
Great. Nick Galakatos, I run a investment fund called Blackstone Life Sciences. Blackstone is a private equity firm, probably the largest, actually it is the largest private equity firm in the world. We manage over $900 billion. And we have a standalone division in life sciences with about 100 people around the world that make investments, but also they run clinical trials, so very hands-on investors. We've made 4 investments recently being the last 3 or 4 years in gene and cell therapy, 1 in the gene therapy space and 3 in cell therapy, which by itself should indicate that we're committed to the space. We think it's a very, very exciting space. And I've been doing it for a long time, about 30 years or so, being in an investment business. And in my lifetime, I've seen the world evolve from small molecules. Take the statins that you take once a day to PCSK9 antibodies that you take a couple times a month, to RNAi that inclisiran, that is a Novartis product that you take once every 6 months, to basically editing your gene and your PCSK9 gene and doing it a once and done. So in a course of 30 years, it's just spectacular what has happened in science. But whenever you take a small molecule, you think about a small molecule as a drug versus a cell as a drug. There's a lot of complexity in a cell that is not in the small molecule. So that introduces a whole range of business, regulatory, commercial complexities that I think are right in front of, and manufacturing, of course, that are right in front of the gene and cell therapy space. So cost of goods for gene therapy and cell therapy products is a big issue. Then regulatory, batch to batch, you make, you run a single run sometimes for a single dose per patient. So that is something, of course, you don't have in the small molecule world. The regulators are overwhelmed. There are over, 2,000 or so clinical trials that are going on in gene and cell therapy. And then, last but not least, but an area that I think is a real bottleneck, hasn't been solved and it's not easy to solve, is the commercial and the pricing and reimbursement. So at $2-3 million per dose, the healthcare systems, the payers are just not ready for it in terms of products for large diseases. For orphan diseases, people, there are ways obviously to get it done, and it is done. But hemophilia, a product for hemophilia is going to hopefully be approved next year. That's not a small product. Sickle cell disease is coming up. That's not a more product. So exactly how payers, including Medicaid, is going to deal with that is still a huge question mark, and I think it's gating for this field. So when we look for something to invest in, we try to take into consideration all of those risks, and a company that has thought through these issues, has great management team, has a product that really can make a difference, is the one that we select to invest in.
That's great. Thank you for that perspective. So Chris, maybe we'll go to you virtually as more companies continue to enter the cell and gene therapy space. How do you see kind of academia and the industry developing, more effective and kind of more productive partnerships? Because that's where a real opportunity is. And maybe from your experience, what kind of has worked well and maybe on the other side, what's worked not so well?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So my name is Christopher Baum. I'm in the field of gene therapy for now like 30 years. Was one of the first postdocs in this field in Germany. And my role nowadays is to lead the Berlin Institute of Health, which is an institution financed by the central government of Germany and belonging to the Charité, the University Medical Center in Berlin, which is one of the biggest university medical centers in Europe. So in my career and also in my role in the management, I've seen multiple roles of interaction, forms of interaction between academia and industry. And I think it's very important to rethink all of them because now in the field of gene and cell therapy, we really need creative collaboration of these two sectors and install new forms of interaction. Let's start with conventional contract research where industry is the client and usually academia has the role as a service partner. I think here the chance for academia is to interpret this as an entry ticket for a more sustainable liaison with industry that can even lead to joint development of skilled personnel and to be conducted with the principles of responsible research and the principles of transparency. What is really interesting in the field of cell and gene therapy that you also have like inverse contract research where academia is driving the project and biotech can be the service partner for academia as the client, so that would be a usual IIT. And this is so important because here you would also find individuals involved that could even be founders of new companies, so that have entrepreneurial type of mindsets developed, sometimes not considered to be important in the beginning of the project, but becoming more and more important as the project proceeds. And here our role in the management is to really identify those individuals and support them as early as possible and offering them a good training for good interaction also with industry. And I think completely unexplored, at least here in Germany, is something like a real balanced interaction between academia and industry in form of true co-working, co-development, joint idea creation and joint value creation. And what we are doing right here now in Berlin is to collaborate with established industry, such as Bayer and other partners, to develop an environment where this can be made possible. So where people really work under one roof, even in the same lab, in the same room, even despite the fact that they come from the two distinct sectors and have joint goals for their project development. This is still in the beginning, but I think this will be highly important for the field of cell and gene therapy to be successfully developed. And here we would be really open to discuss experiences made by others, how such new forms of academia industry collaborations have been realized in a successful way.
I appreciate that, and thank you so much. I think the commentary regarding how do we pioneer together is really important. We need to continue to explore that co-creation for that shared value. So thank you so much. So Luigi, maybe we can turn to you and just, there's a clear risk to benefit profile in treatment of genetic diseases, obviously. The achievements and setbacks create kind of this natural volatility that we've talked about a lot over the course of the day. How should our industry balance assessing risk and data outcomes with continued innovation, kind of threading the needle, as it were?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the question. So let me briefly mention that my experience with the field is going back to about 25 years ago when we started developing gene transfer technology based on lentiviral vector. And in our institute in Milan, the San Raffaele Telethon Institute for Gene Therapy, we have since treated more than 120 patients with different diseases. 2 of the treatment have become approved drug also through alliance with big pharma. And we continue to develop gene editing technology as well for this application. Most of the work has been done on rare diseases. And as you mentioned, this is where you can validate platform and genetic engineering. You have a clear target, of course, and sometimes a very obvious phenotype you can read out your benefit. But they also, of course, present the challenge of a sustainable investment and return, as we have heard. High prices may be manageable for rare disease, but they are not, actually. We are seeing a challenge at that level as well. So this is one of the concerns. They remain one of the key targets. There is still a paucity of application of this very powerful technology. We do see a certain tendency of crowding different platforms on the same target. This is, of course, maybe seen as a healthy competition on the one hand, but is also a sort of a wasted effort, while diversification of target is probably very relevant. Another challenge is also the technology. I mean, this sort of a tug of war between looking at consolidated platform versus riding innovation. There is a continued emergence of new technology. Think about all the editing space, and then there are improved editors, epigenetic editors, versus, let's say, state-of-the-art of, if you want, old-fashioned gene replacement vectors. And in terms of the clinical testing, there is solid experience and very successful outcome of the early platform. And yet we continue to look at this with some level of apprehension, so that an adverse event which emerge may potentially kill a whole platform, a whole investment. And I think this is not a mature way of looking at these drugs. Like every other drugs, they have a risk-benefit ratio. They are a window of therapeutic intervention, which is now solid enough. We understand the details, so we have to look at the complexity. So on the one hand, I think we should value more what is consolidated and is providing successful clinical testing. On the other, while riding innovation, we should also be careful of jumping on the latest kid on the block in terms of technology before knowing more of that. And I would say certainly try to emphasize the diversification of target, and also looking at eventually a reality check in terms of the expectation of the cost and the prices of this. Industrialization will make a difference. The more we develop this treatment, the cost will go down, and I think we will get also to more manageable pricing.
Yeah, that makes great sense. I mean, in some ways, to go fast, we have to be thoughtful and very purposeful, as you've articulated. I think it requires that nuance in this space. So Kendra, maybe we'll go to you next and talk a little bit about, biopharma really investing heavily in this space, right? And I guess building on that innovation theme is, how can we help accelerate innovation in this space?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and it's great to be here. My role currently is to lead the new platforms ophthalmology and hemophilia team in Bayer's business development, licensing, and open innovation group. And as we think about this idea of global innovation, for me that's really in my sweet spot, because I've, in my background, I've worked in R&D, I've worked in commercialization, I've launched new products, I've fed into the pipeline. So now I think as we're at this precipice with this large number of clinical trials going on in cell and gene therapy, there really is so much innovation already out there. So how do we then further enable that to get to the finish line, to get to that commercialization piece? From an industry standpoint, in particular from a Bayer standpoint, I would say there's several ways, but maybe 3 in particular that I would want to call out. I think first and foremost is, as we think about partnerships, we really focus on innovative models. And What that means is a deal is a deal. It's N of one, right? We don't have particular thresholds in terms of deal numbers or how we structure a deal. And I think that's particularly important right now in this cell and gene therapy space, because we're going to have to think very uniquely. We have so many different technologies and different kinds of companies that are developing assets or portfolios in the space that we need to be thoughtful about how we're going to do that. Also, as we think about where the technology is in the development, or not even in the development, in the research phase, how do we want to support that, or how would we partner? And Chris already raised this point about how we're partnering. We're starting to partner with academia, but how do we partner with some of those very, very early stage companies? They might need something different than somebody who has a clinical stage asset. And so the way that we would think about that across the spectrum is, what is the company, what are their needs, and what are our capabilities, and how would we marry them together? And in some cases, we will employ our venture capital arm, which is LEAPS. They would potentially invest with us depending upon what the company needs are. And in other cases, obviously, we might structure the deal quite differently. So I think, as I said, it's about what the needs are for that particular partnership that we're thinking about at that point in time. Another really important point that came up several times over the last couple of days is around manufacturing. And we've already largely invested in cell and gene therapy. You've probably seen that as we, in the last few years have fully acquired Blue Rock, and you saw Seth this morning talk a little bit about Blue Rock. We also, in the end of 2020, acquired AskBio. So we've clearly made a commitment to cell and gene therapy, and we've been looking at enabling technologies like gene editing, which we announced a deal with Mammoth in January. But what's going to be really important then is, how then do we continue to push those opportunities forward in terms of manufacturing? And so we've been making further investments in manufacturing. In fact, we are building a facility, a cell facility in California right now. And so we want to make sure that we can leverage those capabilities. And I think there are a lot of potential partners out there that could develop a partnership just around potentially, some of our manufacturing capabilities. And AskBio and Blue Rock have brought further capabilities, not only from the manufacturing standpoint, but also from process development, analytics, and really those people capabilities to help push that forward. And maybe the last area that I would want to touch upon is, as we think about supporting global innovation, is our global footprint, right? Many companies or many opportunities are really, very focused right now, and which they should be as they get underway and get into development. But we have now the capabilities, we have local operations and local footprints across the globe. And it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all on how we commercialize these assets. It's going to be really understanding the local environment. For example, China is going to be very different than something like the US. And so that's why I also see that industry can help support, as we move these assets forward, the capabilities that we bring forward will be very important to enabling, getting these things across the finish line.
That's great. Building kind of on the theme of collaboration and partnership, a question from the room. How do you see industry collaborating with government and payers worldwide as commercialization advances? And I'll just open that up to the panel, whomever would like to answer that first, and feel free to tag on.
I'm happy to start.
Sure.
This probably stems from the things that I've done in the past. I think goes back to every country will be different. And I think having those capabilities and having those relationships in the countries will be extremely important. And that goes back to the healthcare system. And where do these opportunities fit on particular countries' healthcare agendas? And we should learn from COVID as well that there was a lot of resistance around some of these technologies, right, around mRNA. So how do we continue to educate and work with these governments early on so that they can anticipate that there's still high unmet needs out there, and what these technologies are that we're bringing forward, what a difference they can make. So it's going to be about some of that early engagement. And from a payer standpoint, the same holds. I hope, my vision would be that some of these technologies will actually reach a broader patient population than just some of these rare and ultra-rare diseases down the road. But clearly, if we have several, we have 1,000 clinical trials going on right now. If we have several of these that come to the market, the payer landscape, payers are going to balk, right? And we're going to really have to have some of those discussions around, and we're going to need to invest in the market access, the healthcare economics, to ensure that we have the right conversations early on with the payers. And we do that now. We have a lot of knowledge, internal knowledge now, and we need to leverage that internal knowledge and that capabilities in advance with the payers to enable that runway for the opportunities that are to come.
Here I would like to add that payers are also part of society, right? So I think it's very important to interact closely with society to promote still the acceptance, a wider acceptance of gene therapy. All of us have gotten some mRNA injected in our arms, but this doesn't mean that we really understand the principles of gene therapy in the wider society, and that people would accept that this would be more widely applied in future. And there might be novel forms of drug interactions based on interactions of gene therapeutic products with other gene therapeutic products or conventional drugs. So it's a big unexplored field. And I think it's very important to educate still society what's going on there, and to promote acceptance of gene therapy really in our different societies. And again, this may differ very much, as Kendra said, from country to country.
Yeah, maybe going back to specifically gene therapy and kind of the one and done approach. Maybe to draw from the vaccine example, a third of the US population did not get vaccinated. Part of it was political, part of it was disbelief in the science or straight enmity towards the science. Try telling this population that you're going to change their DNA, or you're going to permanently change their genetic makeup. So there's a fundamental educational process that needs to go through over many, many years, with proof that whatever you do, it works, and it doesn't adversely impact the individual. And if it's a third for the vaccine, a third of the population does not get comfortable with vaccines in countries that are supposed to be very sophisticated in their medical and healthcare system, just think about the countries that are not. So that's a huge threshold that I think science has its work cut out for, in terms of proving over time that whatever we do is right. But I go back to the pricing. A few years ago, not that long ago, we had a first and second generation of drugs for hepatitis C, and they cost whatever, eight-week regimen for $84,000. You cure people from hepatitis C. The payers almost went bankrupt. They had no way of doing, totally unprepared for it. They had no way of really thinking about it, even though they had plenty of warning, and both Gilead and AbbVie had given them enough time. So there is, again, another very large educational gap here that needs to be bridged by industry, by physicians, by practitioners, providers, that these are curative. They save the system significant dollars, massive dollars, when 18% of the GDP goes to healthcare. So there is a big education, both for the layperson, but also to the payers, that needs to happen. And these are not short-term processes. These are long-term, and it's going to take a while.
I guess building on that, in addition to education, as you just said, what other factors do we need to explore to move forward to financial sustainability in the long run? really on a global scale? How do we reinvent this ecosystem? And I welcome you all to comment.
I can step in. So first of all, I think also going back to the government issue, I think that really the role of the government is to take care of those difficult situations, like rare diseases where the market may fail in terms of business opportunity, or engage the industry in a sort of a contractual way so that industry would develop a rare disease target as well when they're negotiating a reasonable price. On the one, so I think that there's room there for figuring out. In Europe, we are seeing really a new track emerging for providing these cell therapies, not only for rare disease, also for CAR-T, for instance, which is a parallel, if you want, even a competing track to what industry is doing by academic facility providing essentially manufacturing and actually administration of those drugs at cost. And then looking for not only government, funding, but even certification and registration of the product, so that there is a competing track, which I think it may address some of the need in terms of access and equity to a certain extent as a parallel track. I think this should not, of course, compete for the same target and application as what industry could be doing. It would actually be valuable to have two different tracks, but I think, and there I think the other important person to mention is the regulator here. I mean, regulatory track is still challenging for many of these gene therapy. There's still concepts which are rooted in earlier approaches, which are making development of these drugs still very, very challenging in terms of cost and assay. We should use more concepts like platform-based approach and validation, and also not expecting, for instance, that the autologous cell product undergo the same level of qualification for release that you would expect for other type of drugs. There must be facilitation on this side, maybe two different track, like a sort of a non-profit versus a profit-based track may also have different expectation in terms of some aspect, not of course in terms of quality or safety. So I think there's a lot to be still developed here to make this available, and that's on the area.
Yeah, I think that's right, and a lot of questions on the chat coming through about that, and how do we make this sustainable, right? Because we have very few commercialized products at the moment, and so far so good, but as the innovation continues and we get more products, it's going to be a problem that we definitely have to solve together globally. So we're getting several on the manufacturing front, and the last one here kind of captures a couple of them, but how can you foster the manufacturing process in cell and gene in developing countries specifically? So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, specifically manufacturing worldwide and kind of a different footprint so that we can access the world.
Yeah, I think the developing countries is the sticky part, right? I'm not sure we've fully cracked the nut on, where we're manufacturing in general right now, right? I mean, we need to continue to invest in manufacturing, as I said before, but I think that the developing country thing is the next step. And I think first and foremost is really getting into continuing to find the right processes and develop the right approaches so that we get better and better. I think there was somebody on a panel earlier today or yesterday that brought up this point that, we've done it in the past, and we should be able to do it with cell and gene therapy. And I know it's two different things, but we should be able to do it in the future as well. So I think we first need to get over that first hurdle of, really trying to optimize and get to where we can do the manufacturing. And then the second hurdle is, okay, now how do we do it in more developing countries and get it to those countries?
Yeah, maybe to add to that a little bit, so there is the capacity question in manufacturing, then there's the technology question in manufacturing, and then there's the geopolitical part to manufacturing. That's the latter being the more recent addition to complexities that we all know. So I think that the capacity part is the relatively easy part to deal with. There was a shortage of that, but there's more than enough now. Probably some people would argue there's overcapacity of that right now. But we're severely limited on the technology side. There's pretty significant technological improvements in analytics and other ways that need to happen to start bringing down the cost of goods so that it can make all these treatments a lot more affordable, and where the pricing reimbursement issue then becomes a lot less of an issue. But as everyone knows, and what we've seen with supply chain issues the last couple of years, people want to nationalize a lot of these manufacturing plants. They want to bring them, U.S. companies want to bring them to the U.S. They do not want to rely for ex-U.S. manufacturing, which goes contrary to the question on or the more fair and appropriately fair issue of manufacturing in developing countries. So I think it's actually going in probably the opposite direction in the near term at least.
Yep, very well said. So I know we're winding down in time, and I'll wrap up kind of with a closing question, and I'd ask each of you to comment. In kind of a headline or aspiration, what are you predicting will happen in the next, from a macro view, in the next 5 to 10 years in cell and gene therapy? I know it's a big question to close on, but.
Predictions, or what do we want to see? What we'd like to see? What's our vision?
Either, you decide.
Yeah, I mean, I think from I already said from a vision standpoint, I mean, 5 years is actually a fairly short time frame. We've talked a lot about the fact that, we have to recognize that these therapies are going to take some time and some investment. But I think for me, it's, as you noted, there are already some therapies on the market, but I would love to see in the next 5 years a few more therapies hit the market, because I think the more that comes out, the more, it's like we'll get that momentum, and we'll continue to learn and optimize. And for me, the thing that I'm most excited by is the opportunity for the patients. And I'm sure, many people in this audience, right, you're having an influence on that. We all have our part to play, and I can't wait to see everyone, collaborating in unique and different ways, because that's what it's going to take in cell and gene therapy to really reach those patients. And seeing those patient stories to me is just the, really what it's all about.
Yeah, going back, I totally agree. Again, drawing back from the experience that we all had on vaccine, the COVID vaccine, and people's reluctance to get vaccinated, the only way to prove the point is that patients get cured of disease, and they're stable and safe, and they do well, and they tell their friends, and they tell their relatives, and these are living proof of what science can do. So I think that 5 years from now, it would be wonderful to have 10 successes of gene and cell therapy products that are safe, that are effective, that save people's lives, make them live longer. And if we can get 10% of the doubters to go the other way, I think that would be a great success.
Thank you. Chris or Luigi, can I invite you to comment?
Yeah, no, I agree with those comments. I mean, those 5 years is definitely the time for consolidating some of the current promising finding. I think we will clearly understand more the power and the potential and also the limitation of the new technology. The big gene editing space with a lot of different strategy. We will better understand how far can we go with that. Probably the shift from autologous cell product to off-the-shelf, universal donor in some application will further grow, and that will be an important change. And I think, I guess in the cancer area and some also of autoimmune neurodegenerative diseases, we are going to see early trial, hopefully, outside of what is already there, but it's still limited. There is essentially an immunotherapy-based approach, but I think gene and cell therapy provide for much more in terms of delivery power to specific tissue, targeted delivery of biotherapeutics, and also tissue regeneration. This area, we will probably see early attempt of that. It's clear that the field is growing and is building on solid data. So I remain optimistic, and the challenge have been mentioned before.
Very good.
Yeah, maybe I would like to add that what we really still need in the next 5 years and 10 years is to increase the critical mass of the field. I think we now see the global investments, but they really need regional hubs as players. And they also need society as well as policy welcoming of this new form of treatment. So I think it's very important that we form hubs where everybody interacts. So players from industry, academia, regulation, patient representatives, and university medicine, and all the relevant disciplines required. And that would be hubs for a joint mission of sustainable development in the interest of patients and society. So that would be my also vision, that we will have then international networks formed between major sites, and we will have enough people joining the field to realize the potential that it has.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's how do we catalyze all of this and make it a force multiplier to take the wisdom and the knowledge that exists and not replicate it, but instead lead that to a quicker destination for more therapy to more patients. So thank you so much to the panel. Really, really appreciate your insights and wisdom, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.